out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 156th episode of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined, as always, by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the United States of America, Gary Action Jackson. And we appreciate all you listeners tuning in from all around the world here. Over this past week, we recently celebrated our 3rd year anniversary. That's right. It's been 3 years since we first put out our first episode, which was a dedication to the late, great Edward Van Halen, not too long after he had passed away. And things have changed. Yeah, we've grown the show quite a bit. I was living in London at the time, talking to Jackson via Zoom, just to check in on him during the pandemic. And then we decided, well, we need to give each other homework assignments on albums we haven't listened to in a long time. And then we would get together next week and talk about them. Suddenly we realized we've got a show. We've got a lot of material and a lot of opinions that the world just needs to hear. And now, 155 plus episodes later, plus a sidecast, first concert memories that we do once a month. All sorts of fantastic guests from around the world, including artists, musicians, podcasters, authors, and big rock and roll fans. It's been so much fun to grow the show, and we appreciate all your help. And if you've been listening to us for a while, you know that we are big fans of the 80s pop prog group Asia, composed of John Wetton, Steve Howe, Geoff Downes, and Carl Palmer. And two of those folks we've had on the show, Geoff Downes and Carl Palmer, shows 79 and 80. And one day we will probably get Steve Howe on this show one way or the other. But we regret that we never had the opportunity to speak with John Wetton. And this year they've been doing a lot to celebrate the life of John Wetton. They had a great book come out called An Extraordinary Life, where there are chapters written by some of his friends and all the people who he'd worked with over the years to kind of tell stories about John and the kind of man that he was. And in the summer, there was a big concert at Trading Boundaries run by Roger Dean to celebrate the life of John Wetton and his music. And now, coming out on November 24th, An Extraordinary Life, the box set, is coming out. It's John Wetton's solo work from 1980 through the time that he died, 6 solo albums that he made, plus bonus tracks for all those albums that maybe have been B-sides or were held back for one reason or another, and 2 discs of new, never-before-released material. Some of it live, some of it studio, sometimes with great collaborators who you will know by name. And of course, this has us very excited. And to help publicize this, to get everybody excited about it, we're going to talk with somebody who he did work with for a bit and befriended and got to know very well in the 2008 to 2011 era. And that's Oliver Wakeman. Of course, that name may be familiar to a lot of you. Yes, his father, Rick Wakeman, is the legendary keyboardist piano player who was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of Yes. But Oliver has carved out quite a career for himself as well, and he toured with Yes for a while. In fact, I saw him play with Yes in 2011. And it was during his time with Yes that Asia was opening for Yes. Asia and Yes have had the same management company since the dawn of time, and obviously they've had some of the same members. And while Steve Howe was doing double duty in both Asia and Yes, for a brief time there, Oliver Wakeman was the keyboard player. And so we wanted to talk to him about what it was like working with John and getting to know John. And I think you'll find Oliver to be an open book and a warm person, someone with a good sense of humor about things. And he's about our age, so he saw these guys as heroes, but then got to know them as a coworker, as a peer, if you will. And he tells great stories about how John never made him feel less than. It was like, oh yeah, that's Rick's kid and I used to work with Rick, whatever. No, John made it a point to go talk to Oliver and befriend him and point him in the right direction when it came to his career and creating his music. And you can hear from these stories that Oliver's going to tell that it really meant a lot to him. And we really had a good time talking with Oliver and exploring the music that we like. There's only about 40 minutes with him or so on the show, but he gave us an hour and a half. We just chatted for the longest time, just talking about music, what we like, when we're going to have him back on the show to talk about other things, all sorts of fun stuff. So I really think you'll enjoy this show, not only in getting to know Oliver, but getting to know his relationship with John Wetton and what John Wetton meant to him in helping him on his career. Now, first, we have a little bit of business. As usual, we like to mention that we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, a network of about 100 different shows on all sorts of genres of music. There really is something in there for everyone. You can visit pantheonpodcast.com or follow them anywhere at Pantheon Pods. And we have to talk about our sponsor, guys. RareVinyl.com, based in the UK, has over 250,000 items in stock. Well, It's holiday season, right? You've got to get something special for that special person in your life. But if you're like me, I know that if you want something, you need to get it for yourself. And then you can give it to your partner or to your children and say, here you go, dear. Wrap this up and say it's from you to daddy. That's what I do. And that's how I ensure I get something that I want. So go to rarevinyl.com right now. Find something that you love, whether it's a first edition album, whether it's a CD, maybe it's a tour program, maybe it's point of sale item from a record store, a poster, whatever. Go to rarevinyl.com and use code UGLY and save yourself 10%. Now, that's a one-time code, so don't just go buy one record there. Do all your holiday shopping. Get everything for everyone there in one big order, and then save yourself a big, fat 10% at rarevinyl.com using the code UGLY. Now back to Oliver. I was fortunate enough to see him play in Yes. It was the Rites of Spring tour in 2011. He had been with the band for a couple of years, and it was intended to be his last little stint with Yes before Geoff Downes came back into the fray. But as we'll hear on this show, there was actually a point where they kind of extended his time in the band, and Geoff was around too. And Mr. John Wetton made it a point to make sure that Oliver was comfortable and doing well during that time. It's a great story, and I can't wait for you all to hear it. So without further ado, I want you to welcome, with me, Oliver Wakeman, as we're talking about the life, music, and character of John Wetton here on The Wolf. I mean, this does happen to me on occasion, but the more that I did research and the more that I thought about and learned about Oliver and read and saw his time with John and what it meant to him, and read more of An Extraordinary Life book, the more excited I've become for this time that we have with him. It's usually we're talking to an artist about their work, or at least their work with someone. And technically, they didn't really record together at all, and just played together very little bit, but because they were friends,
I think that's the big thing, is he truly thought of him as a friend.
Yeah, that's really cool. But so, I mean, it has been a regret, a bummer that we never had the chance to interview or speak with John Wetton. It's never going to come, right?
Right.
So, but we've talked to Carl Palmer, we've talked to Geoff Downes. Mm-hmm. We still have an opportunity at some point in the future to maybe talk to Steve Howe. But it's been great to have people on like Amanda Lehman who would tell us what he was like, or Jim Cregan, who played at the Extraordinary Life show at Trading Boundaries, talk about the kind of guy that he was. And so to have Oliver on, who didn't know him in his crazier days, knew him once he had kind of cleaned up his act and was on the straight and narrow and trying to do his best. I think this is going to be a little more interesting, because you don't have to talk about that arc, when he kind of really hit some bad times.
Hit the skids for a while. And I mean, because how many of those stories but he never made it back. Luckily, John did come back. He got himself cleaned up. He could go on with his career, but to see him during that must have been pretty rough for the friends at that point in time.
And I am pretty upset at the two of us that Asia and Yes toured together for more than a couple of years, and we never caught that.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy.
No excuse for that. I'll just take my beating on that. There's no excuse for it.
I know. I did manage to see Asia when they first got back together. Was it 2006? I guess it was. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have a record contract yet. They were just going to hey, we're going to tour in celebration of our 25th anniversary. Maybe do enough business. Someone said, yeah, okay, we'll give you a record contract, kind of thing. And it was great. And then I don't know, I was busy trying to move to Australia and trying to move back and trying to get married and stuff like that. And Asia, although I would buy their albums, they kind of faded off my radar. And if they didn't come to my town, I wasn't going to chase them,
Well, okay, so there's your problem then. You always think, I'll see them next time. Or, they'll come closer next time and I'll do it then, because stuff comes up and then there is no next time.
And there is no next time. And then that's where the regrets come from. So that's why you have to take advantage of your opportunities when you have them. But no, I'm glad I didn't get to see them. Yeah, I got to see the original band once.
I was going to say, I've seen video clips and audio clips of him kind of at the end of his performing days. And to me, it doesn't sound like he ever really lost anything.
He never lost
he always
any of his
he
voice.
could always belt it out. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's kind of crazy. But I mean, you listen to those latter day Asia albums, and they don't have the exact same production value. It's not done with the same kind of tools anymore, but his voice is still the same. It's amazing. It's a real tribute to him, and it just shows you what a shame it was that we lost him. But this box set is pretty exciting. Up until that comes out, this right here that I'm showing you, Jackson, the viewers at home should know that I'm holding up a 2 CD set called Anthology, which is a collection of all of John's best songs from his 6 solo albums, which is a pretty good way to get introduced to his solo material.
Hi, this is Jim Cregan, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London, and they're just the best.
Hello,
Oliver. Welcome to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Hello. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. And obviously, we could talk to you about a great many things in your career and the music you've made. But we're really here today to talk about someone who meant a lot to the two of us, and that's John Wetton. We became big Asia fans. We were fans as young kids when he came on MTV in the early 80s. But then when we got into college, we kind of started to hear more of it together. Like, well, wow, these guys are really good. We've got to hear more of this, you know? And I read the excerpt from you in this wonderful book, An Extraordinary Life, talking about how you came to Asia's music when you were about 16. It was actually because we're all about the same age. Jackson's about to turn 51 here next month, and I'm a few months after him. So you didn't come to them when they first came out, but you came to them about the same age that we were kind of starting to get into them. What was that like? I mean, it was like, what was I missing all this time?
I was about 18, I think, which would have put it about 1990 for me when I first discovered them. And it was a friend of mine who ended up being my keyboard tech on all my Yes tours, introduced me to them. He sort of said, oh, you got to listen to this. And there was the rumor years ago that Asia originally started off with Trevor Rabin and Dad were approached to do this sort of supergroup type thing, and how it evolved into Asia. And then you hear the story that Yes split up after Drama, and Steve and Geoff just walked out of one meeting room and out into another one, and then formed Asia with the same management. So there's all these sort of political history stories around Yes, which are tremendously exciting and interesting. How much of it is true, I've got no idea at all. I just like the record. Played me the record. I always love Roger Dean's artwork. In fact, it's going to sound dreadful. Such a fan. I've got the Asia artwork framed on my wall up here for the first album up there. It's they're signed by a lot of them, and I have a couple of. You got it as well.
Do you mean that one?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
yeah.
It's just such an iconic piece of artwork. Yeah, I loved it, and I loved the record. There was something about the way John. I say this a lot. One of the big influences that John had on me in my life was his ability to write a verse, and it's probably not something a lot of people say. But I mean, you remember what it was like in the 90s. There was that sort of view in life that you don't bore us, get us to the chorus, was the phrase in England, which was literally, it's only the chorus that matters. And John didn't do that. He made every verse so melodic that when the chorus finished, you couldn't wait to hear the verse again, because it was just like another piece of musical wonder, as opposed to a lot of bands and a lot of songs that you'll listen to and you just sort of go, yeah, they've just sort of come up with something for the verse here just so they can get to their catchy chorus. And that always stayed with me when I was writing songs, and I still do to this day, is that I always think, would John think that was good enough? And it's like a little yardstick that I hold up to myself and go, and that's not just me waxing lyrical and coming up with a nice little soundbite. I'm about to release a new record next year, and I got right to the end of the record and finished it and had it mixed and it was about to be mastered. And I listened to it, and there was one track which I really liked, and I listened to it and I went, the verses aren't right. I said, the verses aren't right. And I phoned up my management company and I said, I've got to go back and get the singer I've got to rewrite it. I have to go back and rewrite it. And she went, you're nuts. You can't, it's finished. And I said, no, it's not right. It doesn't work for me now. It doesn't work. Now all the other stuff's around it. It's not strong enough. And in my head, it was like, it's not John enough. So I had to go back, and that's not so I wrote it to sound like John, but it was that principle of it doesn't have that seal that it's all great. So I had to go back to the singer, and I said to her, I'm ever so sorry, you did a terrific job, but I need you to sing it again. And she went, well, did I not sing it right? And I said, no, you sang what I sent you perfectly well. I just didn't write the melody right. So you've got to do it again, please.
Wow.
So that's always been something that stuck me.
I was going to say, so you hear John in your head just saying, you can do better than that. Come on.
I don't know. Yeah, I think it is. It's like a little yard. I have it from a lot of different musicians that I admire. I mean, obviously, when Dad plays, whenever I do a keyboard solo, I have to think to myself, is that up to the standard of what people are going to expect me to play? Is it the same old licks? You know, you got to come up with something different. But John, he just had that ability. I mean, I saw somebody the other day, and they were sort of saying his voice is like velvet, and it is. It is. He's got a velvet voice, and it just was beautiful. So that was my introduction to Asia, was that first album, and then I got the second album and really enjoyed that. And then this is a really daft story, but I went to America when I was about 16, 17 with my dad on the ABWH tour.
Oh, okay.
So it was probably about 16 when I got the Asia album. I was not 18, 16. So it was about the same time that I got the first two albums, and I was over in America, and ABWH had to do a record signing in a record store somewhere. I think it was Texas. And the owner of the record store took me to one side. I was there with my brother, and he said, if you want to grab a couple of albums, go and help yourself to a couple of albums, and I'll get them for you. And I was like 16, like kid in a sweet shop, walk around my record store and pick up a couple of records. And over there, you obviously CDs were in the tall packages, whereas in England, we just got the boxes. So it's like extra big artwork and stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think everyone was expecting me to go and buy, a record by Dad or by John or something. I walked over and there was the Asia Astra with the purple cover with the
robot.
And I saw that and I said, I thought I'll have that one, please. They were like, that's not really the record we were expecting you to buy whilst on an ABWH tour. It's like, no, I'll have that one, please. Yeah, good. And I still got it.
Are you talking about the one that the cardboard,
long
packaging?
Cardboard.
Right? So what would you do with that packaging?
What did I do with it? I think I got very frustrated because it wouldn't fit in with all my other CDs, so I just put it in front so it was always visible.
Okay. Because what we used to do was take because the CD would come out, so then you took the cardboard, cut it up, and made a little poster of it and put that up on the wall, so you got double the bang for your buck. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, I wasn't that bright when I was a kid, I'm afraid.
Well, I wasn't either. I just had aptitude for things like that.
Well, you mentioned Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and how in getting ready for this, just pouring through Twitter right now, doing some stuff before we came on, I saw this photo. I don't know if that comes through.
With the guys. I can see that. That was the Brother of Mine video, wasn't it?
Yeah, with the makeup on.
Yeah.
And Bill looks amazing in his.
To do that.
Yeah, like how did they convince Steve Howe to do that?
I have no idea. I've known Steve for many, many years. I would never ever dream to go to Steve and say, "Hey, can I paint your face?" I can't see that.
Exactly. Man. Well, of course, Steve was pulling double duty when you were with Yes and getting to know John in that kind of 2008 and 9 and 10 period.
Yeah.
He would play with Asia and then come off, and then you and Yes would come on. And I actually got to see you play on the Rites of Spring tour in 2011 there. I was really happy
2011,
about that.
Rites of Spring, yeah.
Yeah,
that was the last US tour I did with them. But the John tour with Asia was two times we did it. Actually, we did it in 2009. We did a big tour. In fact, it's one of my cherished posters I've got a little music writing room at the back of the garage, and in there I've got two posters which are my favorite posters. I've got the In the Present one, which I did for the first tour I did with Chris Stephen Allen. Okay. And the other one is the Blue Asia poster, Yes and Asia poster, which I have, and I got it signed by all of us in Yes and everybody in Asia. And it becomes more poignant every passing year, as obviously since John has passed and Chris has passed and now Alan's passed.
Right.
It becomes even more special each year, and it just doesn't come off the wall. But when I got asked to do that tour in 2009, I remember I'd had a really, really long, delayed, difficult flight. I think it was one of those ones where you're getting up at 3 a.m. to travel for 2 hours to get to an airport, and they write to you and say your plane's been cancelled and you've got to get on a different plane. And by the time I finally arrived in America, I was thoroughly hacked off.
I'm sure.
And I got to the airport and the taxi didn't turn up, and they had to try and find somebody else to take us. And I remember getting to the hotel and being really, really not in a good mood. And then I sort of walked out through the reception out towards the hotel room, and I just remember seeing John sitting in an inflatable armchair in the middle of the swimming pool. And he just sort of went, "Hey, when you're unpacked, come out and have a chat." And it was like sort of, "Oh, this is going to be fun." He just took he just looked so happy. And I was so miserable.
That's great.
It was just like my first proper meeting. But then we spent a lot of time on the tour because I don't drink. John didn't drink then. That was past his drinking days.
Yes.
And he was always up early, and I was always up early. And so we'd often have breakfast together. We'd find ourselves bumping into each other at breakfast time. And eventually, because we're on the road for 5-6 weeks together,
sure,
it just became a common occurrence. And we had a friend that used to fly us to some of the shows, and we'd always end up sitting next to each other on the plane, and he'd give me lots of career advice and little tips for how to do things. And bearing in mind he was on a plane full of his, I say his peers, of his era, Chris,
sure.
Alan, his manager was on there, Geoff was on there, and he spent time with me, somebody that he was just getting to know. And it was lovely. And I sort of remember thinking to myself, God, he's got all his mates here and he's chatting to me. And I sort of was really chuffed by that. And when he passed, I was talking to the management company that I'm with, which is also John's management. And he sort of said, they always said, he really enjoyed spending time with you. And it was really nice to hear that, many years later.
Sure.
Because he was like sitting on an airplane with a bunch of my idols. I mean, how bad does it get?
That's amazing. No, it truly is.
So he must have seen something in you, that maybe something of himself in you, or something where you kind of instantly bonded or had things to talk about.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it was actually. I think it was just, I suppose it's just that thing of making friends.
Mm-hmm.
When you meet somebody and you sort of say hello and you chat a little bit, and then the next time you chat a bit and you find you're talking about the different things to the same, and they have a similar viewpoint on things. And I can't sit here and say I can remember every conversation we have. I just know that we had lots of them, and just often sat down. I'd walk into breakfast and he'd go, "Hey, join me over here," and we'd just sit and chat and talk about stuff and talk about music and the show. And it's really difficult for me because I was on these tours, and I remember sitting on a plane once next to Chris. I got a seat next to Chris on a journey on the very first tour, and I spent the whole time asking him questions about 90125 and Big Generator and stuff.
Of course, yeah.
And we got to the end of the flight, and he said, "Do you ever stop talking?" And it was like I sort of realized, because I sort of sat next to somebody I'd admired for years, and I had all these questions that normally as a fan you'd never get to know or find out.
Yeah.
And so I sort of sat there. So I'd sort of, when I got to meet John, it was like, I don't want to question him to death over all my questions about the band. But it was a great fun tour. And then in 2011, the Rites of Spring tour that you mentioned, that was going to be my last tour with the band. And then I got a phone call from the management saying the record that they're going to put out with Geoff has been delayed, but we're going to do a small tour of Mexico with Asia. Would you come and do that tour? And I said,
wow.
yeah, great. So I thought I'd finished with Yes, and then suddenly I ended up having another 2 or 3 shows out with Asia again. And I mean, the history around me leaving Yes was around Trevor Horn coming on board and wanting to work with Geoff Downes again.
Yeah.
And so I sort of, in the nicest sense, ended up not being there anymore. and when I turned up in Mexico, I remember, and bearing in mind, John's there with Geoff and Asia's management, and Yes, and Geoff's taking over from me in like 3 weeks' time on the next tour.
Okay.
And John's there with Geoff, who plays with him every night, and they've just written an album together. And he just walked straight over, took me to one side, and he said, "Are you okay? If you want someone to talk to, come and see me." He was, and I thought that was such a nice thing for him to do. He didn't sort of shrug around or shirk around the fact that something had happened that was uncomfortable to me, and I was there feeling. The first thing he did was just come over and check to see if I was okay, and that was always just such a great measure of the man for me. That's always stuck with me. But since that happened, it was such an amazing thing that he did there.
That's a top man. And that's a real friend right there, Oliver. I mean, he's not just like, let me check on you. He's like, I want to make sure you're okay.
Yeah, and especially a situation where he was friends with both you and Geoff. So that had to be a little bit of a strange situation for him. But yeah, that definitely sounds like somebody who is just like and
Geoff,
said, man, top
and Geoff was his Geoff was his friend for many years and his writing partner. So he, if he had to feel allegiance somewhere, he didn't have to do it to me, but he did, and he didn't care. Mm-hmm. He was like, said it's not right what's happened. Check to make sure you're all right. And I just thought that was great. So so I always have a soft spot for him for that. Yeah, and then obviously I left Geoff. Now I didn't see him again kept in touch, but then I saw him again a couple of years later, which was when I played with Gordon Giltrap and we did a show where he came along, which was good fun.
Right, good.
So that was That was quite fun, actually. That was a tour with Gordon Giltrap. I started working with Gordon Giltrap. I don't know how well Gordon is known over in America, but he's very well known in the UK as being a wonderful acoustic guitarist. And we did an album together, which was an album of acoustic songs and rock songs, which we termed Ravens and Lullabies, the Ravens being rock songs and the acoustic songs being the lullabies. And we toured the lullabies basically because we could go out as a duo. And what happened is we then put the full band together to go and do the Ravens part of the tour. And one of the shows we were doing was down in Poole, a club that's not around anymore called Mr. Kipps, where it's close to where John lived. So I wrote to him and said, look, I'm down your way tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Do you want to meet up for a coffee? It's been ages since we caught up. Let's, if you're around, we'll meet up for a coffee and a chat.
Wonderful. After
sound check. And he said, yeah, I'd love to. He said, I'll sing with you if you want. And it was like, really?
Yes, please.
It's a genuine offer. And he said, yeah. What should we do? Just do Heat at the Moment? And I sort of had to go back to the band that night after sound check, and say, we're doing another sound check. And they said, why? I said, well, John Wetton's joining us tomorrow night for Heat at the Moment. And they were all like, brilliant. So we all sort of sat down and learned it. And turned up to do the show. And it was a great afternoon. The band were buzzing because John was up there. And it was just remarkable. He just turned up, walked up on stage, belted out Heat of the Moment beautifully.
Yes.
And then came and did the same thing for the show in the evening. And it was just one of those moments, and it was a real bucket list for me because that was one of the things that I'd always wanted to do was record or perform with John.
Sure.
And I sort of, that really sort of ticked the box for me because unfortunately I never did get to write with John. And that's one of the things about the box set that's so wonderful and slightly heart-wrenching is that you see so many people that he worked with. You sort of in your head as an Asia fan, you think of it as just him and Geoff and they were writing partnership, but he wrote with so many wonderful musicians, a lot of who I know.
Sure.
And sort of slightly jealous that I'm not one of them, which is a bit of a pity, but I did get the live performance. So that was a winner.
Yes. Good for you on that. Yes. We were remarking how until this beautiful box set is coming out, the closest you could get is this 2-disc anthology of John's, which is kind of the best of all of his solo albums. But now you get so many great unreleased tracks and 2 discs worth of never before heard stuff. So it's got the whole prog and Asia world abuzz, desperately awaiting it, no doubt about it.
I love the box set. It's beautiful. I mean, it's so beautifully done.
Well, we've seen the prints of it. I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Oh, right. Well, the one thing that amazed me about it was I was listening to it, and obviously I knew the Asia stuff of John's, but I didn't know his solo work as well. And there was the one record I knew, which was Rock of Faith, which was the one that he did in Thin Ice Studios with Clive Nolan and Carl Groom. And they are 2 people that I've worked with a lot. Clive and I have worked a lot on a couple of records, and Carl mixes every single one of my records. I think pretty much every single thing in my discography, Carl has mixed. And so I knew that was going to be a quality record. And I remember them telling me at the time they were really excited. We got John Wetton coming in and we're doing the album with John, and they had a great time doing it. And I always sort of think, okay, so when I got the box set and I listened to it, I sort of listened to that record first because I sort of knew it.
Sure.
And I remember listening to it, and I remember listening to the song right at the end. There's Cold Comfort was the last track.
It's coming, but I was lost in hopes and schemes, and your reality is so far from my dreams. Ain't it funny how it's just cold comfort to me now.
And then I was listening to the Welcome to Heaven album, and there's a track at the end called Love Is, and I was listening to those and I sort of thought, Cold Comfort and Love Is, what, both amazing, brilliant tracks. And then when I was reading the booklets, it's like they're the bonus tracks, and you just sort of go, John, that's not fair. You can't have songs that good that are just your bonus tracks. That just seems, he was so good at songwriting and so good with the melody that even the offshoot tracks were just amazing. And it must have been a nightmare trying to produce one of his records when you've actually got to try and choose the 11 tracks or so to fit on a record. And
where's going to be the B-side, because these are all A-sides.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just so much good stuff. And that's the thing that really sort of hit me more on the record was even the amount of different people he wrote with, it still sounded like John. Nothing, You know, when sometimes you work with somebody or you've got two artists together and you can't hear one of them because the other one's domineering.
Sure.
With John, it wasn't that. He just, you can even listen to it. You can sort of hear stuff that maybe somebody else had written, the chorus that someone else had written, but he still made it his own. He was just super talented like that.
For your affection, part of me would love to take you in. Your innocence had caught me, but 1,000 nights had taught me that love is more than a fire. Love goes, your desire, love stands. Whenever it falls apart, I don't think that you know what love is. Love is. God knows, there's gotta be so much more. Say it again when you know what love is.
I just, you know, I mean, that's what nice thing about the box set is just there's not a duff track on it. You just listen to it record after record, and you just sort of go, how does he do this? It's quite remarkable.
And it's always been like that, right? I mean, how are Ride Easy and Lying to Yourself B-sides? Like these fit right onto Asia and Alpha perfectly. Like,
yeah,
you know, these could be released as singles. Why would you hold these as B-sides? Just put them on the album. But like you say, you've got an embarrassment of riches with John.
Yeah, you just reminded me, but there was another B-side, wasn't there, from one of the Asia records? So was it Ride
Daylight.
On?
Daylight.
Daylight. What track am I thinking of? Do you know what? I haven't done my research on the Asia B-sides for this. Sorry, I'm a bit lax. but I do remember having an Asia record with a B-side on it, and I had exactly that same thought, which was, oh, come on, this can't be a B-side. This is this is ridiculous. But then, yeah, a lot of prog bands do that. They just seem to write really good stuff. But it's but that, and the other thing that's really nice about the box set, just to go back to the box set, is that the book that comes with it. You say you haven't got the book is just beautiful, and it is literally, you know, spine to spine of just amazing photography, all the lyrics, all the details, all the people that he worked with on the records, John's thoughts on each record, and there's a thread all throughout the record describing his solo career. And the thing that comes through more than anything else in the record is the warmth that everybody felt from working with him. You know, there's no prima donna sort of stuff with John. Everybody just loved working with him and found him a joy to work with, which isn't always true of people in the rock world. There are some characters that can be harder to work with than others, and John just wasn't one of them.
Yeah. Well, no, we've had several people on the show who've worked with him. Steve Hackett, Amanda Lehman, Jeff and Carl have been on. Jim Cregan has been on. And because we've never had the opportunity to speak with John, we always ask at the end, okay, thank you for promoting and for coming on the show. Can we ask you something about John? Can you tell us something about him as a person? Because we know he's worked very well, but you know, what was he like as an individual? And I haven't really heard anyone say anything except that he was warm and he was very funny.
Yeah. I miss him. I miss him a lot, and I sort of miss him more in the same way that I miss Chris and I miss Alan. Is that they're such larger than life characters, and you can't believe that they're not around. That seems, you know, because they have such a weight of personality. And I mean, I think to this day, I'm going to bump into Chris Squire at some point, because I spent so much time with Chris over 3 or 4 years that they can never not be around. If that sounds like a really daft thing to say, but they're so alive through their music and the experiences you have with them. You can't imagine that they're not around anymore. And I find that hard to think of with John. I sort of, you know, I still have John in my address book, I still have Chris in my address book, and I still have Alan in my address book, because I can't bring myself to think that they're not in my address book anymore. So they're still there. That may sound a bit odd, sorry, or maudlin, but
no, they're
it
right behind me
like,
here. I tap into them whenever I can, you know, so I understand.
Yeah,
it sounds more like it's you know, you value having them in your life, and that it's just kind of keeping them in there. It's just kind of keeping them close to your heart. Yeah,
I think that's it. It just sort of keeps it alive and keeps the memories strong. And you know, I was invited to play at the John Wetton Memorial concert, which I couldn't do, which I was really upset about. But the management phoned me up and said, "We know he'd like you to play. Would you like to come?" And I said, "I'd love to." I just couldn't do it that night, unfortunately. But it was nice to think that I was considered close enough to John that they would want me to do it. So that was lovely as well. And what's also been really nice about this John Wetton stuff recently is just how many people have come out and talked about how great he was. Fans, other musicians. It's just nice to hear. It's nice to hear. And yeah,
whatever he said. So I was just going to say, everyone knows he had this beautiful voice, and he never lost it, even though he had some health problems.
No.
He gained weight, he lost weight. He always sounded amazing. I think he's underrated as a bass player. And Carl came on the show and said he's the only guy I could never move. I could nudge Greg Lake a little bit if I want to take it up tempo or move around. John was the Rock of Gibraltar. I never was able to move him an inch. What would you tell us as a musician about what you saw of his bass playing?
Oh, he was amazing. I mean, I have amazing admiration for John and Chris as well, is that ability to play bass and sing. And they're not just root note players. I mean, I'm not sure Chris ever hit a root note in his life, but
that's for sure.
but John, and particularly with John being a 4-piece band as opposed to Yes being a 5-piece band, where Chris was backing vocals and bass playing, with John taking the bass all the time and singing, it was remarkable. On that Asia tour, Yes and Asia tour, I, hand on heart, must have sat and watched that show 3/4 of the tour. Every night I'd go and sit and watch the tour just to go and watch their show. Sometimes I couldn't catch all of it because I had to get ready to go and do my bit, but every night I would go out there and watch a bit of it and genuinely enjoy it. And watch with awe as John would just belt through these songs and not miss a beat. He just never missed a note. And same with Chris. Chris had the most remarkable memory as well to work with. He was a nightmare at times because he just remember things that sometimes you try and get away with something. You'd never get anything past Chris. He'd remember every single thing. He came up to me once when we were rehearsing Siberian Khatru, and he said, "Oh, you're missing out a string part." I said, "Don't think I am, Chris." And he said, "Yeah, you are." And he pointed it out to me. He said, "It's this point here, there's a string part." And I listened to the record and I said, "There isn't, Chris." He said, "There is." I said, "There isn't." And I got Benoit, who was a singer in Yes at the time, to come. I said, "Benoit, can you hear anything here?" And Benoit said, "There's no string part there, Chris." And he said, "Well, we put one down in the studio, so it can't have made it to the mix, but could you put it in for tomorrow night?" I said, "But I don't know what it is, Chris. I can't hear it." And he sort of sang it to me, and he said, "Yeah, it was like that sort of thing, but a bit more minery. Can you sort that out and put it in for tomorrow night?" And it's like,
goodness.
Yeah, all right. I was already doing 2 other things at the same time with the other hands. It was like that old Spinal Tap line. "Can you do that?" "Yeah, I've got 2 hands." It was that. I've got 2 hands. It was one of those nights.
Excuse me, Biff, can you play a bass line like Nigel used to on Big Bottom? Can you double that? You recall the line, it's in fifths.
Oh, yeah. I got 2 hands here. I can do it.
Right. So that's good. We can play that one.
But that's the sort of thing I always sort of think bass players like Chris and John were amazing. They had this ability to just do the 2 things separately, and their vocals weren't playing off the bass parts as well. It's not like they were, like I said, root players or roots and fifths. They were moving around and very melodic.
Absolutely.
So he was a remarkable musician. And one of the things in the book is you read about how he was writing songs, and he would always say that piano was his main instrument for writing. So he'd always write most of his stuff on piano, and 10% were on guitars. And then when you sort of think, well, then when he goes to the band and just plays the bass and sings, he's not even like writing the songs on a bass. He's actually then crafting a separate bass part,
right, and
then playing it. It's just amazing, really. And I think that's sometimes where people forget just how good a musician he was, because he was a great musician as well. Because everyone just go, "Oh, John Wetton, brilliant singer," but he was a great musician as well. It's remarkable. A bit like Chris, when you go, "What an amazing bass player!" It's like he's an amazing singer. Chris is,
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, another thing in the book from Rick's section that I had no knowledge of was the whole Bruford, Wakeman, and Wetton thing that was happening in the 70s when all of us were pretty small, I guess. I had no knowledge of that, and I guess the press got wind of it, and then it blew apart because everyone was signed to different record companies, and back then they were very protective of it. You couldn't just go do something for fun. Everybody kind of owned your musicianship, I guess, at that point. Has Rick ever talked to you ever about that experience, or have you ever heard any of that material?
No, I will ask him. Actually, I'm seeing him in a couple of weeks. I'll do that. I tend not to talk about music with Dad too much. It's a really weird thing because we have a different sort of view on it, really, because he sort of remembers it all from growing up with all these people, and all these things were just not. It's a bit like in my family. There's an element where my mum and Dad divorced when I was about 5 or 6, but my mum obviously grew up with Dad around the time of the Straubs and when he was just a session player and before he got to Yes. So she grew up with him when he went through all the major changes. And, you know, my brother plays piano, my sister plays piano and writes, and I have done lots of writing and playing over the years as well. And there's nothing, in the nicest way with our family, there's nothing special about saying, oh, I've done an album. You know, somebody gets impressed if you turn around and say, I fixed a leaky tap. Someone's like, well, really? How did you do that? You know, it's a bit like that in our family. So when it comes to talking to Dad, we don't tend to talk about music because there's nothing unusual about it. There's not that father-son sort of thing. Oh, well, that's really interesting. Tell me about it. You know, it's because it's already been done. So I don't talk to him for a couple of weeks. Obviously, these people were people he grew up with. He grew up with them in their 20s and 30s. And they all went through their growing up years. And I turned up as the kid that they all remember seeing at the age of 2 or 3.
Sure.
And then suddenly there I turn up in the band in my 30s and I'm up on stage. And Chris Squire used to say to me, so it was bizarre. He said, some nights we'd look across with the lights, you know, on the top of you in the middle of close to the edge or something. And he said, and I'm suddenly transported back 30 years. He said, and it was like watching Dad. Wow. And he said, you're 50% just like your dad. And he said, and there's another 50% of you that is absolutely nothing like your dad. And it was like, and it was quite nice. And it was, so we sort of all had a different relationship. I sort of got to know them as friends and people rather than my dad's friends in an odd sort of way, which I preferred actually, because I liked that. We developed our own relationships.
Yes.
Rather than just being constantly, oh, that's Rick's son that's playing the keyboard. You know, it was just, that's Oliver, you know, filling in for Rick. And it was just nice. It was a nice thing. And they all treated me really, really well. And I loved all that. So with Dad, we never really sit and talk about these people. We only ever really talk about them maybe when one of them has passed away, when we both get asked to do something and we just sort of talk to each other about them. Like when Chris died, Dad told me some stories about Chris, which I didn't know, and things like that. And that's when it's sort of the only time we'll really talk about music. Other than that, we talk about comedy shows and stupid things that have happened.
Well, he's preparing for his annual winter concert, like holiday special. Wouldn't he be about this time?
He does, yeah. I'm not sure. I don't think he's doing a tour this year. I think he did the tour last year. He's doing a couple of shows this year.
Gotcha.
But yeah, every year he ends up down in the town that I live in at the town hall. So me and the kids go down there and say hello for a little bit, and then I have to get them back for bed. But it's always nice to go and see him. But he's coming here for a couple of weeks. He lives on the other side of the country, which probably out in America isn't that far, but over here it's long windy roads and it's a bit of a pain to get anywhere. So he's going to come here for a while, which is quite nice. We did a concert at the beginning of the year as well. We did a charity concert for a couple of schools, which was really nice. We got to spend quite a bit of time together then. But again, we didn't talk about, actually the only thing we talked about this time was grand pianos. We just had a conversation about pianos, but yeah, we don't really tend to talk about music in any detail at all. It's odd, isn't it? You'd think we would. You think we just talk about it all the time. Yeah. Although I do remember one time, actually, I lived with him on the Isle of Man for a short period of time, and I was flying on an airplane to go and see my mum, and he gave me a cassette, and he said, you must listen to this. If you do nothing else in your life, he said, you must listen to this cassette. And he said, it's one of my favorite records, and you must listen to it, and you must enjoy it. And I put it on my Walkman on the aeroplane, and it was In the Court of the Crimson King.
Oh, wow.
And so he introduced me to that record when I was about 15, 16, and I loved it. I thought it was the most amazing record I'd ever heard. I thought it was just marvelous stuff. And so that's the only time I can really remember him talking to me about music, which was to introduce me to that record.
I walk a road horizons, the tournament's begun. The purple piper plays his tune, the choir softly sings. Lullabies in ancient time for the court of the Crimson King.
Well, you talk about playing live. The prog and the Yes World is agog about Winter's End Festival, because apparently you'll be playing some music that no one's heard live before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Yeah, well, I mean, the From a Page record and the new record, which obviously hasn't been played live, but From a Page was the record of songs that I worked on with Chris, Stephen Allen, and Benoit before Trevor Horn came on board. Actually, they were Chris and I and Steve were working on it in England together a lot, and then we all went over to a house in Phoenix. We rented a house over there, a 5-bedroom house, and we all had a room, and we all used to meet in the lounge and sit and write and perform and record all these songs. And so we had quite a lot of them pretty far demoed up. And then Trevor Horn came on board and wanted to do the old We Can Fly track, which was a track I think they'd just done once at Madison Square Gardens back in 1980 on a tour, and then they'd used it as a Buggles record, but then he wanted to do it with Yes, and
Right.
so it was okay. And then suddenly that then became 2 tracks, and then it suddenly became 3 tracks, and suddenly my music wasn't required anymore because Geoff had suddenly come on board and they're writing all this music, and it sort of twisted more into a Trevor Horn and Geoff project than the Yes project that we'd been working on together. So when I left the band, I ended up being given all the tapes, or discs as they were.
Sure.
And that was it. And they sat on my shelf for years. And then I think one day I opened up a Pro Tools session, I think, when it was the Gift of Love track. And I just sort of played it through because we recorded it. We did it the way that Yes used to record, which is we rehearsed the whole track together a lot of times, and then we recorded a backing track together. So we didn't play to a click, we played to Alan. So we recorded Alan's parts and all played to Alan, and then had Alan separated out so we could then play our parts again. But I had just the rough takes from all of us doing the original stuff, and then everybody's overdubs, and then I just sort of thought, I'm going to mix this up and try and finish this song just for myself, and just have a private Yes record that no one ever knows anything about. And we had about 3 or 4 of these, and I sort of over time just sort of tinkered with the others as well. And I think I did a tweet one day that just said, oh, I've been listening to a Never Heard Yes song, which we all did on tour, on a writing session. And the manager wrote to me and said, what is this? And I sort of had a chat with them and said, this is what it was. It was the songs that never made it onto Fly From Here. And they said, well, we'd like to put those out. And they originally wanted to re-release Live from Leon and put them on as bonus tracks. And I said, I don't think they're bonus tracks, really. I think they're not just demos. These are pretty together tracks. And so they said, well, come down and see Steve. And I hadn't seen Steve since I'd left the band.
Oh, okay.
And they invited me down to his farmhouse. And so I thought, all right. So I turned up at his house, and we hadn't seen each other since I'd left. And we shook hands, and we came in. It was like old times. We just sat down together, and we put the record on, and Steve sat down there with a piece of paper and a pen and played the first track, and he just started tapping his foot. And then when Benoit started singing, he looked at me and went, Benoit sounds good. And then it just got through to the end, and he listened to all the tracks, and he said, we've got to do something with these. These are so much more advanced than I remember.
Indeed.
And so then I was given the go ahead to finish them off and put them together, and we put them out as a record late 2009. I think we put it out in like November 2009, and through Burning Shed, which was like a mail order company only. And it even through the mail order company, as a sort of almost a Yes self-release record, it got into the charts. It sold so quickly that it jumped into the charts for a week, and it was like, blimey, there's really something here. And it's still selling copies now, and people still write to me pretty much once a week. I get emails from people just saying how much they like the record. And so I got asked to do this festival, and they said, what can you do that's a bit different? And I said, well, we could play From a Page. And they were like, well, could you do that? And I said, well, I've got a female singer, a girl called Hayley, who sings beautifully, and she could sing all the parts. And I've got Oliver Day, who was the Yes in a Yes tribute band as an acoustic player. So he's coming along to do all the guitar parts. He's bringing his lap steel along. So yeah, we're going to give it a good bash. So it should be good. It should be good fun. It's got a lot to learn. It's not the easiest pieces of music in the world to learn for a one-off show, but it'll be good fun to play them. It'll be a laugh.
The Gift of Love at 10 minutes and there's some ups and downs through that. Yeah, you're going to have to do a few rehearsals, but you're right. These aren't bonus tracks. And if you include the edit from To the Moment, you're talking about more than half an hour of music. You don't just slap those on the end of an live album. It's its own thing. So I know the Yes fans were really excited when this came out. What was it, 2019 or whenever it was?
Yeah. And there's I mean, I've still got some of the original demos. At some point I'll get all the other stuff together as well. There was the demos of the tracks that we did. There's an acoustic version of Words on a Page. There's a few other bits and pieces. There's, because we demoed The Man You Want See and Me and Hour of Need and Into the Storm with all, because I wrote half of Into the Storm. So there's a version of that with all my keyboards on as well. There's all this other stuff that's just needs time spent on it. So maybe one day I'll get around to those as well. But they were the three that never were released, and so they were the ones that I wanted to spend the time on. I think they're very yesy. I think the thing about that record that really worked was, I think you could tell that it was a band that was enjoying each other's company and they were enjoying working with each other, which hasn't always been true in Yes's history. There's often been a lot of conflict and
that's right,
disagreements. But with the version of Yes that I was with, obviously because Dad wasn't doing it and John wasn't doing it, they didn't have a driving force, as it were. John was always a driving force of actually pulling the band forwards of what he wanted to do. And suddenly Chris, Steve and Alan, who maybe in the past would have had disagreements, suddenly found themselves having to steer the ship. And so they had to work together, maybe more than they'd ever done before from a business sense, and actually making it work, because without John they couldn't afford to get into silly squabbles and arguments. They had to make it work for a band. And Benoit came on board and sang beautifully, and I came on board and was just pleased to be there and felt that I had something that I could bring to the table, which was I took all the songs back to their original arrangements and all the original parts, rather than some of the adaptations that had happened over the years. And we all got on. It was, the tour manager came to me and he said, it's really weird. I said, what do you mean it's really weird? He said, well, the other night, he said, I saw you in the restaurant. I said, yeah. And he said, you were sitting down with Chris and Scotty and Benoit. He said, and the next night, you and Benoit with Alan, and the next night there was Chris and Alan together with Benoit, and then the other night there was you and Benoit sitting with Steve. He said, I've never known a tour like it. Every other tour I've been on with the band, it's been 5 separate tables, and they all sit at separate tables, not talking to each other. And he said, it's really nice to see everybody just pulling in the same direction. And that is the thing that I think comes across on the record, that there's a real feel of 5 people working to create something that was real. And I think that's why it sounds like Yes. It doesn't sound like someone's solo song which someone guests on, because there really was the collaboration of everybody working their parts and trying to find the best way of doing things. And I think that's the bit that I'm proud of most with that record, is the fact that it does have that real Yes quality about it, which I think is important and sometimes hasn't been on every record.
Well, you did an amazing work there, and you've been very generous with your time here late on a Thursday evening in the UK. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to plug, whether it's your website or anything that's coming up, or box sets that have been out for a while, anything you'd like our listeners to know about?
Yeah, I mean, there was Steve Howe fans, there was the box set I did called Collaborations, which came out last year, which has got the albums that I did with Gordon Giltrap and Steve Howe, which is a lovely box set. And next year's the new album, which is called Anam Cara, which is a Celtic rock record, which I'm very interested to see what people think, because everybody keeps saying to me, why don't you just do an all-out keyboard player record and just do 40 minutes of soloing? And it's like, yeah. Now there's too many other musicians to work with first. I want to work with lots of other people. Yeah. So I will do one at some point, probably before I die, but it's not top of my list at the moment. But this next album is got some wonderful musicians on it. I've got a great violinist, Robert McClung, drummers, Scott Hyam, who was in Pendragon for many years. I mentioned Hayley Griffiths, who is a great rock singer, also sings soprano. So it's like, wow, the best stuff you can have. Music. Oliver Day I mentioned already. I got Troy Donockley from the rock band Nightwish as well, playing Ilian pipes and whistles. So it's not the record that I think people were expecting me to do next, but I don't think I've done one record that sounds like the previous one yet. I think that's part of the fun of being a musician, isn't it? You write. My son always used to say to me, he said, why have you written that? And I said, because no one else has. I write stuff that I want to hear, and so that's sort of what drives me. Rather than doing the same thing over and over again.
Good.
Which might be to my detriment. Maybe I shouldn't do. Maybe I should just do the same thing so people get used to what I do.
That's called being an artist,
though.
sir. Yes, you're being a true artist. Yes, good for you. Well, look, you are welcome on the show anytime. If you want to come back and when the new album comes out, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'll come on for the new album, but I'd love to do that as well. Yeah, because it's
absolutely, no doubt about it. Yeah, and like I said, you're welcome back anytime. So thank you. Can't thank you enough.
Oh no, it's been a pleasure. It's been really good fun. But yeah, we'll chat again. Well, as soon as the record's out, I'll get in touch again and we can sort it then.
Sounds great.
Thank you so
Brilliant.
much.
It was a pleasure. Nice to see you.
All the
nice
best.
to see you. Thanks.
Bye. Hi, this is Oliver Wakeman, and you're listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Holy mackerel, Jackson.
Well, so much for half an hour.
Oh my God. I haven't talked to my father that much all this year. Are you kidding me? That was so much fun.
Is, like, kind of at the half an hour mark, I'm like, I don't really want to go into anything new because you kind of have to go. And
right.
It didn't seem like that. So, okay.
What a cool guy. You know what? We're the same age. So we kind of have come into music in the same eras. Obviously, his exposure might have been a little bit different being in the UK and being that his father's this extraordinary musician. But still, in our generation, we get it. We knew it when it was albums, and then it became cassettes, and then it became CDs. And then we're kind of, we like what we like. What a guy.
Yeah, just a cool, just a guy. You can tell he's not only a professional musician, but a fan too.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, and that story with John Wetton going to him and saying, hey, you kind of got screwed on this deal. Are you okay? That was pretty big too.
That's a class act right there. No doubt about it. You wanted the epitome of a class act. I mean, he's the generation older. He is peers and buddies with everybody else. Mm-hmm. Geoff is his writing partner through all the Icon and all the Asia stuff. He's written with Geoff more than anyone else. So it would be very easy to say, hey, sorry, kid, but my man's taking it back.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's cool that he wanted to get to know Oliver, especially after having worked with Rick in the 70s. I had no idea that he and Bill and Rick had gotten together, were maybe going to try to work something out, and then the press kind of blew it up, and then the record company said nope. So that's a shame.
Yeah, what I liked about that story was they were like, we can't do this because of the record companies, but let's do it anyway, not tell anybody.
Yeah,
we're here now, and forget it. We'll just put it on tape and see what happens. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Well, I hope everyone enjoyed our chat with Oliver Wakeman. I hope it came through that we all really did have a good time getting to know each other a little bit and hearing stories about John Wetton. It's pretty cool that John, as an elder statesman in rock, took Oliver under his wing and made friends with him and showed him the way and kind of helped guide him on his career. And if you ever want to know about the character of John Wetton, that story about them being in Mexico when Asia's still opening for Yes, but Geoff Downes is about to take over for Oliver in Yes. They just kind of decided that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go back to the drama era band, and Oliver was going to lose his spot. And despite the fact that John and Geoff have been writing partners for decades, he wanted to make sure that Oliver was doing okay. That's a class act. That's a top man. And that was John Wetton. I'm so sorry we never had the chance to meet him. But I'm so happy that we've had the chance to talk to Oliver here on the show and get to know a little bit more about the man and a little bit more about this great box set. It's an extraordinary life. It's out November 24th. You can get it most anywhere. Beautiful 64-page booklet, 8 CDs with lots of bonus tracks and previously unreleased live and studio stuff that John wrote and made with a lot of people over the course of his storied career, over 40 years in music. Of course, Jackson and I are big Asia fans, and we were proud to talk to Carl Palmer and Geoff Downes on episodes 79 and 80, met Lisa Wetton at the Yes Show at Royal Albert Hall in 2022. We'll get Steve Howe on the show here one of these days. Talked to Chris Slade, who was in the band briefly, never with John, but so glad that we got to talk to Oliver Wakeman about this, and hopefully we'll have Oliver back. Great guy, funny guy, very big talent in his own right. Maybe we talk a little bit more about his music in the future. Of course, we're going to Winter's End Festival in April. You'll be able to see him play music from a page, the Yes album that he helped write and contribute to that came out in 2019. And I know a lot of people are really excited about that. So we want to know, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? You have to let us know. Email us. It's uglyanamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. Let us know the bands, the concerts, the albums, the books, the DVDs, the box sets, the rock properties that you want to hear us talk about. Follow us on X. It's at ugly_werewolf and at actionjack72. We're also on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Threads. We're on YouTube. And we're hoping that you're following us there. We're also hoping that you're downloading and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. And if you go to a certain spot, guys, hey, if you're thinking about it, please give us a 5-star review. It's huge for us. It helps us grow the show and helps us find more rock and roll fans like you from around the world that we can bond with. Thank you, as always, to Pantheon Pods. And thank you to our sponsor, RareVinyl.com. Guys, most of you are going to hear this for the first time on Black Friday. It's time to do your holiday shopping. Go to rarevinyl.com. Use the code UGLY. You can save yourself 10%. They ship all over the world. In the UK, you might have a little bit more time to get that shipped to you, but in other spots, you want to go ahead and get that done. Get that to you before the year ends. Rarevinyl.com. Use code UGLY. Save yourself 10% off your holiday treasures. Next week, we're back to reviewing another classic album, having another big anniversary, so you'll have to tune in for that. But until next time, to all of you rock and rollers all around the world, be cool and keep doing what you do to keep rock alive.